Aafa-Rokka is not merely a territory. It is a high-functioning bio-network. Under the reign of the patriarch Oba, this savannah operated as a closed-loop system of peak efficiency. Here, the ecosystem balancing force was the law of the land, a biological stasis that held the chaos of the periphery at bay for 10 generations. Within this equilibrium, the brothers were biological mirrors, two apex specimens locked in a golden terrestrial stasis. They moved within the Pride's established geometry, their dormant genomes waiting for a catalyst. Eze was the pulse of the plains, a high-frequency predator of fast-twitch fiber and restless curiosity. His biology was tuned to the wind and the horizon's edge. Aka was the Pride's gravity, a specimen that functioned as a structural anchor, his neural pathways calibrated for observation and quiet calculation. The patriarch's expiration created a biological vacuum. This sudden loss of a keystone individual triggered a latent evolutionary failsafe, forcing both brothers into a radical molecular divergence. Aka descended toward the core. Through aggressive melanic overexpression, his coat began to drink the light, transforming him into a dominator, a silhouette of pure mass and obsidian gravity. Eze's cells accelerated. He underwent a luminous adaptation, his fur shedding gold for a silver-white bioluminescence. He was becoming a being of pure frequency, vibrating toward the upper atmosphere. With enough adrenaline trigger, Aka reached thermal instability. As the dominator ex primus solus, his internal core ignited his mane into a corona of realistic solar fire. He became a terrestrial star, a walking hearth of obsidian flame. While Eze could achieve kinetic lift, through a pressurized discharge of bioenergy, he ascended, a golden prime, surveying the kingdom from the clouds on trails of white light. The age of the lion has ended. One has become the sky, the other the fire. A dual monarchy, light and heat. In the prehistoric corridor of Aafa-Rokka, the reign of the patriarch Oba was defined by a rare biological stasis. Stability here was not a passive state. It was a high-functioning social contract. For 10 generations, the Pride maintained a flawless trophic cascade, ensuring that the opportunistic scavengers of the periphery remained relegated to the shadows. But ecological dominance is a moving target, and the memory of the landscape's fracture is long. As the hyena clans execute a multi-axial breach of the perimeter, the two siblings exhibit polar survival strategies. Aka operates on a frequency of pure hypervigilance. His posture is a study in defensive geometry, minimizing his profile, his neural pathways firing in a recursive loop of caution as he anchors the Pride's center. Eze, conversely, is a surge of juvenile kinetic energy. He is a whirlwind of fast-twitch muscle fiber, striking with immense force, but lacking the tactical restraint of a seasoned apex hunter. In a moment of high-risk impulsivity, he breaks the defensive phalanx, pursuing a retreating scout into the unmapped scope. A volatile spark provides immediate heat, but it rarely preserves the structural integrity of the heart. There is a profound atmospheric resonance when a keystone individual falls. The ecology of Aafa-Rokka registers the loss through a sudden cessation of movement. The grass remains static, very biosphere seems to exhale in a moment of biological silence. To the Pride, Eze is the victor, the Alpha who neutralizes the Aka does not process the patriarch's expiration as a sacrifice, but as a systemic failure of the defensive unit. To him, the fallen king is empirical evidence of his brother's tactical error. The silence of the sire is not a peace. It is a deafening indictment of his recklessness. A hierarchy built upon a sudden vacancy is only as stable as the synchronization of its successors. In the heart of Aafa-Rokka, the social contract is beginning to fray under the weight of its own legacy. The solar cycle returns to Aafa-Rokka. Yet the atmospheric pressure has shifted. The dawn no longer signals stability. It illuminates a power vacuum. Eze occupies the apex position formerly held by the patriarch, but the transition is biologically abrasive. He is no longer a localized unit of the Pride. He is the Keystone individual upon whom the entire structural integrity of the kingdom now rests. Beneath the celebratory vocalizations of the Pride, a divergent frequency is emerging. Within Aka, the biochemical response to the patriarch's expiration has turned toxic. While the Pride registers a savior response, Aka's neural pathways are locked in a recursive trauma loop, replaying the structural failure of the defensive phalanx that led to the sire's termination. Aka initiates a strategic decoupling. He vacates the light-saturated center of the territory, followed by 3 subadult males exhibiting similar markers of social dissatisfaction. They move as ghost predators, their departure marking the first visible tear in the Pride's communal fabric. Recognizing that a direct kinetic challenge to the blood oath, the Pride's collective defensive instinct, is statistically improbable, Aka seeks an asymmetric advantage. Recruits the oppressed classes, those whose populations have been suppressed by the Lion's Law for generations. Aka no longer operates within the Pride's ethical parameters. He acts as a tactical navigator for the very hyena clans that were once the Pride's primary ecological rivals, guiding them toward the vulnerable core of the ancestral biome. Eze recalibrates. He emits a primary authority vocalization, a roar modulated with the deep frequency resonance of the late King Oba. In response, the Pride's females execute a high-order defensive formation, creating a golden wall of muscle to intercept the incoming tide of encroaching scavengers. The brothers engage in a high-stakes exchange of physical data. AKA strikes with a low center of gravity, utilizing superior velocity to bypass Eze's guard and compromise his flank. Eze counters not with a vocalization of distress, but with a high-mass rotational strike, utilizing his superior skeletal leverage to neutralize AKA's momentum and drive him into the substrate. The duel clarifies a grim biological reality. The energetics of protection differ fundamentally from the energetics of destruction. In the silence of the combat, Eze internalizes a brutal ecological truth. Mercy is a metabolic luxury that an apex leader in a state of siege cannot sustain. The internal dissidents have now become masters of the nocturnal cycle. As the first thermal drop of winter descends upon the valley, the Pride faces a systemic collapse. The conflict has moved beyond a mere skirmish. It has evolved into a long-term territorial war. The desert functions as a merciless ecological filter. It possesses no capacity for judgment. It simply facilitates the breakdown of biomass, Aka, once a prime specimen of the golden lineage, is now an environmental outlier. His royal genetic markers are being absorbed into a landscape that offers no biological recognition of his rank. The Alpha has permitted Aka's biological survival. Yet within the complex neural architecture of a social predator, clemency creates a permanent psychological fracture. Eze's final vocalization remains encoded as a permanent directive. Exist as a peripheral shadow. Expire outside the pride's collective memory. Failure is a slow-acting metabolic depressant. It does not immediately terminate the organism, but it triggers a systemic atrophy of the social drive, aka retreats from the high-resource zones of his origin, carrying the physical data of his brother's restraint. Aka initiates a total rejection of the solar-rich grasslands. He migrates into the high-toxicity cursed lands, a zone where life is statistically improbable. He moves toward the geothermic silence of the deep earth, seeking a new environmental anchor that responds only to the frequency of the isolated survivor. In this forbidden biome, the landscape is a vacuum of traditional resources. The environmental stressors do not provide comfort. They act as a biological forge. Aka's neural pathways begin to rewire. For his entire growth cycle, he operated as a secondary genetic backup to the patriarch and his brother. He was a specimen, defined by his proximity to others. The secondary, the alternative. To achieve dominance, he must first overwrite these original social settings. AKA confronts the psychological ghost of his former hierarchy. In an extreme physiological event, the prince persona is biologically overwritten. The dominator emerges from the process. He no longer seeks a role within the pride's structure. He seeks to modify the very environmental parameters of the region. The exile has been biologically superseded. The outcast is extinct. In his place stands a specimen of pure melanic optimization. The environmental warning was not delivered via a standard meteorological event. It manifested as a profound acoustic stasis, a total cessation of bioacoustic signaling across all trophic levels. The equilibrium of Aafa-Rokka was entering a state of total structural failure, marked by a silence so absolute that the localized biosphere seemed to suspend all respiratory functions. The approaching force did not utilize standard predatory formations. They moved with the inevitability of a tectonic shift. Aka returned as a biological vector for the arid extremities of the cursed land, inducing a rapid trophic dehydration of the landscape. The law of the claw, the pride's ancestral combat doctrine, was rendered obsolete in a single afternoon. Against the melanic dominators, standard courage was merely a catalyst for a more rapid termination of the specimen. The defenders found themselves attempting to engage a force with anomalous physical properties, possessing the elusive dispersal of smoke and the structural density of stone. For the first time, the apex hunter encountered a predatory unit that did not exhibit standard biological vulnerabilities. On the high-altitude roof of the world, two divergent evolutionary paths reached a terminal collision point. The sun encountered the void. However, the Luminous Alpha was experiencing a critical decay in energy output, while the shadow had stabilized into a state of total radiant absorption. Eze fought using the neural imprints of the patriarch's legacy, but Aka had become the living manifestation of 1,000 metabolic hungers, moving with the sheer gravitational weight of the mountain itself. The Dominator did not prioritize the termination of the king. He targeted the destruction of the symbol. brother who had previously granted him clemency, Aka demonstrated that in this new ecological order, mercy has been reduced to ash. The solar cycle did not conclude naturally that day. It was effectively executed. The Great Circle was not merely fractured, it was recalibrated into a restrictive biological collar, exchanging communal freedom for absolute structural dominance. The king remains a living specimen, but the kingdom has ceased to function as a sovereign entity. Eze is left to witness the silence he once sought to prevent. Under the rule of the dominator, the ancestral bond of a brother's love has been recalibrated into a permanent, inescapable prisoner's debt. To facilitate a total systemic restoration, the subject must first execute a complete deconstruction of the neural pathway. Eze did not retreat for concealment. He initiated a voluntary neural shutdown. While Aka derived kinetic energy from the high-decibel distress signals of the Forbidden Land, Eze identified a power source in the subacoustic silence between heartbeats. Before he could recalibrate the kingdom's gravitational weight, he had to jettison the psychological ballast of his own perceived failures. He spent a lunar cycle within the complex architecture of his own consciousness, restructuring his cognitive map. The hierarchy was rebuilt not through physical fortification, but through a deep tissue psychological audit. When he reached the conclusion of this mental overhaul, his visual sensors were no longer clouded by emotional static. They attained the absolute clarity of a frozen high-altitude lake. With the mind functioning as a hardened fortress, the musculoskeletal system was recalibrated into a precision instrument. Eze did not train for predatory aggression. He trained to become a high-capacity biological vessel. Every muscle fiber was pushed past the threshold of distress until it achieved a state of rhythmic synchronization. The recoding was successful. The specimen previously defined by the mistake had reached biological expiration. In his place stood the luminous, adapted specimen. This version of the Alpha was no longer a nostalgic projection of the past. He was the inevitable verdict of the future. The training cycle was not a struggle, but a controlled ascension protocol. Eze forged his working cells in the fire of his own will, converting his respiratory output into acoustic thunder and his visual focus into high-energy lightning. The usurper had spent multiple seasonal cycles constructing a socio-political infrastructure of stone and silence. However, the geology of the region possesses a long-term storage capacity for data, and the solar cycle does not require metabolic permission to initiate. The Alpha returned, exhibiting a sun-centered biological resonance, yet the landscape had undergone a total sensory deprivation of light. Aafa-Rokka had transitioned from a functional kingdom into a non-healing ecological dysfunction, a state of chronic systemic trauma. Aka had not introduced chaos, but rather a high-order, terrifying structuralism. The natural pulse of the Great Circle, the Pride's rhythmic resource cycle, had been overwritten by the cold, mechanical throb of the Dominator's synchronized heartbeat. The indigenous hunters had been recalibrated into shadows on a string, their movements dictated by the Dominator's centralized neural output. This created a tactical paradox for Eze. To engage the subordinates was to damage his own genetic kin. To exercise restraint was to facilitate the expansion of the shadow. Eze identified the core objective of the mission. He could not resolve the conflict through standard kinetic warfare. He had to transition into a high-intensity frequency. He had to emit an acoustic frequency signal so profound that it caused a resonant frequency failure in the Dominator's control strings. Dominator registered the shift. Within his obsidian-rich, high-altitude spire, the central node detected a break in the neural tether. The King Lion was no longer a dormant memory. He had become a total harmonic vibration, approaching to recalibrate the bioacoustic signature of the entire world. Aka had not merely occupied the apex seat. He had excavated the world's structural integrity, replacing it with the cold, rhythmic hum of a localized abyss. However, a shadow possesses no intrinsic power. It is defined solely by the absence of a radiant source, a source that has now resynchronized. The indigenous population had undergone a forced physiological refit. The environmental stressors of the cursed land had overwritten their natural high-mobility adaptations, favoring a high-mass, utilitarian configuration. They were no longer autonomous predatory units, but biological hardware repurposed for heavy industrial resource extraction. Dominator's error was structural. A snapped neural tether cannot be reintegrated. The King Lion's bioacoustic broadcast reached the periphery of the savannah, triggering a widespread sympathetic resonance among the population of Aafa-Rokka. Shadow exhibited significant spatial volume, but possessed near-zero structural density. In contrast, the solar-centered Alpha remained a compact physical unit while maintaining absolute thermal integrity. Facing imminent systemic failure, Aka transitioned from social leadership to predatory scavenging. He ceased to view his subordinates as biological assets and began treating them as kinetic batteries. By absorbing the remaining biomass of his followers, Aka triggered a terminal merger with the geothermic forces of the cursed lands. He was no longer a biological king. He had become the red vessel of the void, a localized singularity of pure entropy. The Red Dominator now functioned as a storm of total energy decay. Against this frequency, standard musculoskeletal armor is rendered non-functional. To To engage this force through raw kinetic output is to accelerate the thermal collapse of the biome. Eze bypassed the peripheral turbulence and targeted the eye of the storm, the point of highest pressure. The King Lion's final engagement was a demonstration of harmonic precision. He identified the exact frequency required to shatter the Dominator's structural cohesion. Eze delivered a single, calibrated impact, a flat surface strike at the precise center of the Dominator's shadow mass, disrupting the entropic flow. In a landscape governed by ancestral metabolic debts, victory is a fragile state of equilibrium. The Luminous Alpha successfully resolved the immediate duel, but the cursed land's old force had not concluded its resource reclamation. Aka was no longer the operator. He was the fuel. The biome began a process of total power withdrawal, condensing every borrowed spark of energy into a single, unstable, and horrific vessel of compressed mass. Its intent was never to facilitate a monarchy, but to establish a self-sustaining atmospheric furnace. AKA has achieved the state of Dominator X Primus Solus, the singular bio-sun energy-producing organism. He functions as a localized supernova. To initiate physical contact with the Solus state is to risk immediate molecular deconstruction. Every kinetic output from the entity mimics a dying star. Eze, the Luminous Alpha, is being pushed to the brink of the abyss by a sibling who has transitioned into a total thermal furnace. For the first time since his neural re-architecture, the King Lion encounters the data of his own insignificance. His golden radiant output, previously absolute, is being absorbed by a high-intensity orange frequency. He has become a solitary light source, attempting to neutralize a runaway wildfire. The Great Circle did not suffer a structural fracture when the spire collapsed. It entered a state of latency. From the inception of the first predatory hunt to the current twilight, the ancestral genomes converged. They channeled 1,000 cycles of courage and stellar wisdom into the biological shell of their final living successor. As the musculoskeletal system reached its maximum load capacity, the ancestral spirit assumed control of the hierarchy. The collective frequency of Aafa-Rokka functioned as a bioforge, with the blessing of the ancestors serving as the kinetic lift. Eze's heartbeat synchronized with the planet's geophysical pulse. He ceased to be a unit of bone and blood, transitioning into a high-order vessel for the solar concept. Utilizing the legacy data of the patriarch and the bioacoustic energy of his population, the King Lion oriented toward the inferno. His objective was not the termination of a biological anomaly, but the retrieval of the original consciousness from the entropic state. Deep within the hyperentropic's core, the original genetic spark remained, a submerged unit drowning in a sea of stolen shadow mass. Eze did not deploy a kinetic claw for execution. He extended a spiritual frequency for restoration. The solar cycle achieved total dominance, and for the first time in the current era, the shadow did not retreat. It achieved rest. The hierarchy was reclaimed, and the biome initiated a healing phase. However, the primary victory was not the restoration of the throne, but the successful retrieval of the lost genetic asset. The Great Circle has completed a full rotation. The king occupies the apex position, while the former usurper has been relegated to the quiet nursery of his own consciousness. The nocturnal cycle is no longer categorized as a systemic threat. It has returned to its original function as a period for metabolic rest. The Dominator War acted as a total biological kiln, incinerating the Prince persona and leaving behind an alpha who no longer requires high decibel vocalizations to maintain authority. Eze has successfully integrated the core energy of a stellar event, returning with a mastery of low-frequency stillness. He has internalized the prime governing principle. In the lowlands, the shadow mass has identified a new functional purpose. Aka observes the high spire without the neural markers of envy, exhibiting the systemic peace of a specimen extracted from a terminal abyss. Having witnessed his brother's transition into a state of celestial grace, Aka's neural architecture has achieved rest. The ancestral rivalry has been classified as a ghost, a non-functional data point, replaced by a life debt that serves as his new primary honor code. Eze's visual sensors track a specific movement within the valley. The silhouette is now clearly identified in the high-contrast morning light. He monitors her high-mobility, untamed movement patterns, triggering a deep-seated biological requirement to acknowledge the presence of a unique genetic peer. The mystery is assigned a designation: Zola, Shadow Guard of the Highlands. She is no longer a peripheral ghost of the conflict, but the grounding anchor for Eze's high-altitude divinity. Zola provides a sharp, analytical wit to the high spire, a necessary biological tether to the terrestrial biome. In her, Eze has identified a genetic equal. She functions as the lunar reflection to his eternal solar output. Aka observes this unification with a profound humility. He notes that Eze's terminal strength is derived not from his kinetic wings or thermal output, but from his capacity to reintegrate into the baseline social structure of the Pride. The Shadow Prince emits a soft, metabolic breath of contentment and returns to his patrol. The kingdom has achieved a state of high security equilibrium. The Alpha has achieved emotional synchronization, and the Sun has reached a state of stable, sustainable rest.